So in terms of the user interface, you mentioned a little bit how you wanted it to work a bit like a browser back and forth. And looking at that, is that something that is also something that you adapt to new players? Because it is kind of daunting to step into Football Manager for the first time, because it is menu heavy. It has to be, and it is always going to be. Yep. But still,
the internet.
Yeah. There's quite a lot of stuff on it.
Exactly. There's a lot of stuff on the internet, and some sites do navigation much better than others. But we've worked with, and we've been working with them for a few years, but we work with a company in the UK called Flow, who are a specialist in websites. Most of the big airlines that have good websites have gone through Flow's process.
What are those airlines that have good websites?
BA's webpage is pretty good. Virgin's webpage is pretty good. I don't know whether they would directly Flow, but I know that they do a lot of airline sites. And when you've got that kind of experience of how to streamline the shopping experience, if you like, when you're coming to something with an interface that is quite daunting on Football Manager, to have people teaching you the ways that you can make things easier, because we're not GUI experts. We like to think we are. But working with people who genuinely are has been fascinating and eye-opening. So a few examples of that with the adaptive layout and the different home pages that we have that have panels on them, and you can configure those panels how you want, and the higher your resolution, the more panels you have displaying on the screen at any one time. That came about because we just had so much white space on the screen. It was so frustrating because we couldn't fill that stuff in because people with lower resolutions couldn't see it. So by making it configurable, they can see everything. By changing the way that the back and forward buttons work for the navigation system, that rather it being screen dependent, it's now panel dependent. But if you hold down on the back or forward, it keeps the history of the last 25 panels that you visited, so you can easily browse around that way. But it's something that I said in one of the blogs: if you're a Luddite and want to play the old way, you can change it all in preferences to go back to playing the old way anyway. But certainly for the newer users, we think that it's so much more intuitive this year for navigating around the game.
Because I think a lot of players, they play it one way, and they play it the same way year after year, and they may not even notice some new features because they don't really go into that. They have a certain way that they play. They do tactics a certain way, and even if the setup changes, it's different. One thing that's going to save me a lot of time is the fact that you can set a few different tactics, and you can have your team train all those tactics at once, which is...
And home and away tactics, being able to set specific home and away tactics that it remembers which one to use. You know, that there are people who the tactic wizards, as I call them, you know, that's very, very important for them. But for the wheeler dealers, the contract side of things, and the offer to club and the merging of the news items for that is very important, which is, if you offered a player out to a club, you might get 10 offers back. They're 10 offers on separate news items, and you've got to look at each offer individually. We've now, using the transfer centre inside the game, we have all of that information there on one screen. So you can browse through those offers all in one go. You get one news item telling you that you've got offers there. You just go into the transfer centre and do it in one go. It's going to save people a lot of time. But there's 7 or 8 different types of player when they're playing FM. As you said, you go heavily on the tactics. I'm a wheeler dealer. There are others that micromanage absolutely everything. And we have tried to make it easier for every group, but also made the options more obvious. And one thing that we saw in beta testing this year with some of the hardcore of the hardcore of players is people coming back and going, oh, I love this new feature. And we're sitting there going, it's been in the game for 4 years. It was just hidden in a sub-menu of a sub-menu of a sub-menu. That's all gone. Things are just easy for people to find now.
One thing that I was wondering about when I saw the whole, how you sort of can have several tactics and they will get used to it in training and all that, sort of if you buy a player who's perhaps playing a similar tactic at his previous club? Will he get a head start into that, or how will that work, and how will it remember that?
Yes, he does. Everything gets remembered. You know, the history side of things in the game is the code that's there is quite stunning.
Because it's kind of interesting with Inter this year. They got a new coach who wanted to play with three players at the back.
Yep.
None of the players wanted to do that, and basically he was fired after 3-4 games.
Yeah, and the team had played really, really badly. So it is an important thing. I've got a particular tactic that I like playing in the game this year. I don't tend to have loads of different tactics. I do have a home and away one, but they're the same tactic, just one's a bit more defensive than the other. And I go out and try and find players to play to that tactic. But if you can find players that are already playing it, then yes, they do have a head start. You do find that when your players go on holiday, they do forget quite a lot of the stuff. So they don't just come back the next season with 100% on everything. And it is important to be training more than one tactic, because if you don't, your assistant manager really bores you by telling you each week, you need to be doing more tactics, boss, you need to be doing more tactics. So have a couple of them in there, and then he'll shut up as well. But the strange thing is, I know that you play the game quite a lot. Did you know that was in the game last year?
You know, it's
So this is a prime example of something where we've just made it clearer on the user interface, because that was hidden away on a tactics panel. It was actually hidden away in the training panel last year. Makes no sense to be in training. It's part of tactics. Yeah. It is, you're training them to do it, but it's part of the tactics module. So if, as someone who plays the game just looking at the tactics and you didn't touch training, you wouldn't have even known that that was there. Yeah. But now you can.
I usually let my assistant do that.
Fair enough. But, you know, the home and away thing is new, and being able to train 3 at the same time is new as well. But tactical knowledge was in there last year.
So we've talked a lot about the features that you've added for the game to make it more accessible. But then again, UEFA throw in a few things that, you know, will sort of change the game up a little bit as well. So how you sort of tackle that side of things, and is it in there at all?
UEFA nicked that off us. Because we haven't let clubs go into debt in the game for a long time. And there was someone protesting at the UEFA fair play rules outside there with the bibbing horn. So the problem with the way that UEFA have implemented the rules is that no one knows how they've implemented them yet, which is very frustrating for us at trying to make the most realistic game that we can. So the way that we've got them in there at the moment is that if a club goes into administration, then they can't play in Europe, is how we've done it, because we need to wait and see whether Man City's 40 million a season training complex sponsorship deal is allowed, and whether Manchester United floating on the Singapore stock market is allowed, and the various other things that are being tried at the moment to not necessarily get round them, to live within the rules but still have an advantage. So we're going to wait and see exactly what happens before we follow those rules exactly. But we're relatively forgiving when it comes to the financial side of things in the game anyway. It starts off incredibly realistic, and then we let clubs make a little bit more money than they would do in real life by not letting them do things that are stupid.
That's what the board is there for.
Yeah, the boards... I think the boards in the game don't necessarily have the egos that some football club boards out there have, of where they need to be number one, therefore they will do anything to get there. And I think English football is a very good example of where it's gone wrong financially. You've got so many clubs that are in serious financial trouble, and clubs like Plymouth, who, you know, might not have ever been a world-beating club, but to see them in the state that they're in, hopefully they're about to be bought, so that'll be good. But seeing them in the state where they can't afford to pay any of their players, and their manager is selling his, or their ex-manager is selling his FA Cup medals to, you know, to be able to raise money to pay the other members of staff at the club, is really bad. So I'm glad that UEFA have done something. We've just got to see. We've just got to see how it works.
And another initiative that they're adding is the homegrown players and the youth players and all of that. Has that sort of pushed you into sort of, improving that feature of the game as well? Because, it's going to be an important part of football years to come.
Yeah, I mean, we've had that in the game for a few years. The rules have actually changed slightly this year with the Champions League. So there's... the rule is, it's something like if... Previously in the game, if you'd signed a player who was under 21, they could automatically play in the European competitions. They actually have to have been at the club for 2 years in real life. So De Gea, for example, at Man United, you have to register him. Yeah. And if you go and find that 16-year-old wonder kid, you have to register him if you want him to play in Europe. So it is an important part of it, and youth academies have become very important globally, really, even for clubs like Man United, where you've got people like Cleverley coming through the youth academy, Paul Pogba, Ravel Morrison, that are players that they signed at a very young age, then put through the youth academy, put through that system. So we've changed the way that youth academies work in the game as well, and we've actually given more control to the manager. So rather than just having 8 players dumped with you at the start of the season, you now get 16 towards the end of the season and have to choose which ones you want to take on, or you can ask your assistant manager to do it if you don't want to go that in.
It's good at appraising potential. And
yeah, it's pretty useful to get an assistant manager with good judging abilities this year. I think he helps a lot with finding those good young players. So it's strange because I keep being asked about what have you focused on the game this year? What have you focused on? We focused on absolutely everything. We've tried to improve everything. The match engine has improved animations, better stadiums, better crowds, flares in the crowds if you're in the right league, scarves if you're in England, better weather. So every single area of the game has been looked at, and we've tried to improve it because whilst FM11 was up there with our highest rated games and was certainly up there on the sales perspective, we're never happy with our work. This is probably the happiest I've been with one of our games is FM12, but I still sit there with a notepad writing down things.
It's always next year.
Yeah, exactly. There's always next year, I hope. As long as Sonic the Hedgehog keeps me there, then there's always next year. But he's being all right at the moment, so...
He's got the Olympics to look forward to.
He's got a few games that he's kind of working on himself with the Olympics and Sonic Colours, and there's various other titles whose names I probably should know. Generations, that's the one I was thinking of. I need to get it for my nephew for Christmas, so he's a big Sonic fan.
You got some ins on that?
I probably do, but I will actually go out and buy it because it's a Christmas present. So I'll keep one at home. Sonic is actually quite bad at sending out free games, but Tails is wicked. He's such a nice bloke. He always sorts us out if you ask him nicely. But yeah, when it's a Christmas present, I always tend to buy them.
All right. So, well, I guess the only thing that's left to do is to spend a few hundred hours in Football Manager 2012, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Cheers.